I was 28 years old the first time I realized my mother had been poisoning my mind since I could form memories. And I'm not talking about the metaphorical kind of poison. I'm talking about the slow drip of venom that seeps into your bloodstream so gradually, you don't even know you're dying until you're already dead inside. My name is Sarah Chen, and I grew up in Riverside, Connecticut, in one of those picture-perfect colonial houses with the white picket fence and the hydrangeas that bloomed every spring like clockwork. My mother, Patricia, made sure everything looked perfect from the outside, because that's what mattered to her. The outside, the image, the performance. Inside the house, everything was polished and controlled, like a showroom no one actually lived in. Shoes aligned perfectly by the door, coasters under every glass, no fingerprints on the fridge. No noise that wasn't approved in advance. I learned early that mess was a moral failing. I remember being 6 years old and bringing home a drawing from school. It was a family portrait, stick figures holding hands under a smiling yellow sun. I was proud of it because Mrs. Henderson had put a gold star in the corner and told me I had real talent. Real talent. I ran into the kitchen where my mother was arranging flowers in a crystal vase. There were always fresh flowers, never the same ones twice. Patricia Chen didn't do leftovers. "Mom, look what I made," I said, holding it up with both hands like it was the Mona Lisa. She barely glanced at it. Her perfectly manicured fingers adjusted a lily just so. "That's nice, Sarah, but the proportions are all wrong." "And you colored outside the lines here," she said, pointing with one elegant finger tipped in ballet pink. "If you're going to do something, you should do it right or not do it at all." I was 6. That became the pattern. Every achievement came with a correction. Every success came with a qualifier. Every moment of pride came with a dose of shame dressed up as helpfulness. When I made the honor roll in middle school, my mother said, "Well, Emily Vasquez got straight A's. So maybe you should study harder instead of wasting time on those books you're always reading." When I won second place in the 8th grade science fair, she said, "Second place is just first loser." "Sarah, when I got accepted to Boston University," she said, "it's not Harvard, is it?" My father, Thomas, was a different kind of absent. He was physically present at the dinner table every night at exactly 6:30, but emotionally, he'd checked out sometime around my 3rd birthday. He nodded along to whatever Patricia said like a dashboard bobblehead. "Yes, dear. You're right, dear. Whatever you think is best, dear." He never contradicted her, never defended me. Never noticed the way my shoulders curled inward over the years like I was trying to fold myself into something smaller, easier, less offensive. I learned to make myself small. I learned to apologize for taking up space. I learned that my thoughts and feelings were inconveniences at best and character defects at worst. I learned that love was conditional, and the conditions kept changing, so you could never quite meet them no matter how hard you tried. By the time I was in high school, I'd stopped trying to make my mother proud and started trying to avoid her disappointment. But that's like trying to avoid rain in a hurricane. You're going to get wet no matter what you do. Junior prom was the night I realized shame could feel physical. I'd saved money from my job at the library to buy a dress. Nothing fancy. Just a simple blue dress from Macy's that made me feel pretty for maybe the first time in my life. I came downstairs and stood in front of my mother, heart pounding. She looked me up and down once. "That color makes you look washed out," she said, "and it's doing nothing for your figure. You really should have asked me before wasting your money." I went to prom anyway. I smiled in the pictures. I danced with Jeremy Kowalski, who was nice enough but clearly would have rather been there with Madison Tors. The entire night, I felt like I was wearing a costume made of shame. College was supposed to be my escape. Patricia had opinions about that too. She insisted I stay close to home so I could visit on weekends. She insisted I major in business because that's practical. "Sarah, you can't make a living with your head in the clouds." She insisted on approving my course schedule each semester because you don't have the judgment to make these decisions on your own. I was 19 years old, and needed my mother's permission to sign up for Introduction to Poetry. She said no. The gaslighting was the worst part because it was so subtle I didn't recognize it as abuse. My mother would say something cruel, and when I reacted with hurt, she'd look at me with wide, innocent eyes. "I'm just trying to help you, Sarah." "Why are you so sensitive?" Or she'd deny saying things she absolutely said. "I never said that. You're remembering wrong." "You always do this." Or she'd twist the conversation until somehow I was apologizing for making her feel bad about making me feel bad. It's a special kind of insanity when the person who's supposed to love you most treats your reality like it's negotiable. I started keeping a journal in college, not a Dear Diary kind of thing. A record, conversations, dates, times, exact words. I was starting to doubt my own mind and I needed proof that I wasn't losing it. I filled 3 notebooks in 2 years. After graduation, I got a job at a financial consulting firm in Hartford. It wasn't my dream job, but I didn't know what my dreams were anymore. I'd spent so long being told they didn't matter. My mother had opinions about this too. "You're starting at the bottom, Sarah. Emily Vasquez's daughter is already a junior analyst at Goldman Sachs. You really should network more instead of being so shy and awkward." I wasn't shy and awkward. I was beaten down and exhausted from 22 years of being told I wasn't enough. But I was good at my job, really good. I had a head for numbers and patterns. I saw things in financial statements other people missed. Within 6 months, I identified a major discrepancy in one client's accounts that saved them from an SEC investigation. My boss, Marcus Rivera, called me into his office. "You have real talent," he said. "I'm putting you on the path to junior partner." I called my mother to tell her. That was before I learned better. "That's nice, dear," Patricia said. "But don't let it go to your head. I'm sure they tell everyone that to keep them motivated. Just focus on doing your job and try not to make waves. You know how you can be." How could I be? I wanted to ask, but I already knew the answer. Too sensitive, too emotional, too ambitious, too something. Always too much of the wrong things and not enough of the right ones. The real breaking point came 3 months before my 28th birthday at a family dinner. I should have had the sense to skip. My younger brother Jason had just gotten engaged to his girlfriend Melissa. She was sweet and boring, and exactly the kind of safe choice my mother approved of. Patricia spent the entire evening gushing about the wedding plans, how beautiful everything was going to be, how proud she was of Jason for finding such a lovely girl. I sat there pushing garlic mashed potatoes around my plate, trying to be happy for him. I was happy for him. Jason was a good guy and he deserved happiness. But there was that voice in my head, my mother's voice, whispering that I'd never have this, that I was already 27 and still single, that I was too difficult, too damaged, too much of a disappointment. Then my mother turned to me with that smile that never reached her eyes. "So, Sarah," she said, "when are you going to find a nice man and settle down? You're not getting any younger, you know, and you really can't afford to be picky." Something inside me cracked. I set my fork down very carefully and looked at her, really looked at her. And for the first time, I saw her clearly. I saw a woman so empty she had to hollow out her own daughter to feel full. I saw a woman so insecure she needed to make me small to feel big. I saw a woman who had never once told me she was proud of me without adding a but. I opened my mouth to say something, anything, but she continued. "I mean, look at you, Sarah. You're almost 30 and what do you have to show for it? A mediocre job at a small firm, no husband, no prospects. You live in that tiny apartment with the broken dishwasher. You drive a 10-year-old Honda. You never make an effort with your appearance. Honestly, sometimes I wonder where I went wrong with you. Jason turned out so well and you, well." She paused and waved her hand dismissively. "You're just Sarah." The table went quiet. Jason looked uncomfortable. Melissa studied her wine glass. My father examined his steak like it held the secrets of the universe. And I sat there feeling like I was 6 years old again, holding up a drawing with a gold star on it. Just Sarah. Not enough Sarah. Never enough Sarah. That's when it hit me with perfect clarity. It didn't matter what I did. It didn't matter if I made junior partner, found a husband, bought a house, checked every box. In my mother's eyes, I would always be a disappointment because she needed me to be one. She had built her entire identity around being the long-suffering mother of a difficult daughter. If I wasn't difficult, then who was she? I stood up. My chair scraped against the hardwood floor. "I'm done," I said. "Done with what, dear?" Patricia asked, her voice dripping with that condescending patience that used to make me crumble. "Done with this," I said, gesturing at the table, the perfect roast, the perfect china, the perfect performance. "Done with pretending this is normal. Done with letting you treat me like I'm fundamentally broken when the only thing that's broken is you." Her face went pale, then red. "Excuse me. You've spent my entire life telling me I'm not good enough," I said. My voice shook, but it didn't break. "Nothing I do is ever right. Nothing I am is ever acceptable. I'm done apologizing for existing. I'm done begging for crumbs of approval from someone who will never give them." I grabbed my purse and headed for the door. Behind me, she sputtered. "If you walk out that door, Sarah Marie Chen, don't expect to be welcome back. I'm your mother. You owe me respect. After everything I've sacrificed for you, this is how you treat me. You're being dramatic and ungrateful and proving exactly what I've always said about you." I turned around one last time. "You're right," I said. "I am proving exactly what you've always said about me. I'll never be enough for you, and that's okay. Because you'll never be enough for me either." I walked out into the cold November night and didn't look back. I didn't speak to my mother for 6 months after that dinner. And in those 6 months, something extraordinary happened. I started remembering who I was before she told me who I should be. It started small. I bought a dress in a color Patricia would have hated, deep emerald green. I wore it to work on a random Tuesday just because I wanted to. Marcus stopped by my desk and said, "You look different." Good different, confident. I felt different. I started saying no. No to after-work drinks I didn't want to attend. No to family obligations that felt like punishment. No to the voice in my head that sounded like my mother telling me I was selfish and difficult. Turns out selfish and difficult felt a lot like self-respect. But cutting off a toxic parent doesn't happen in a vacuum. The rest of your family doesn't know what to do with you. Jason called twice a week at first. "Mom's really hurt, Sarah. She didn't mean it like that. You know how she is. Family is family. Family is family, the universal excuse for tolerating abuse." I told Jason I loved him, but I wasn't apologizing for having boundaries. If he wanted to keep enabling her behavior, that was his choice. I was done. He stopped calling as much after that. Work became my sanctuary. Without my mother's voice in my head, I focused like I never had before. I stopped shrinking. I started speaking up. I made waves. I identified patterns in emerging markets the senior partners had missed. I pitched an aggressive strategy for a tech startup client that tripled their valuation in 4 months. I brought in clients through sheer competence and quiet confidence. Marcus promoted me to senior analyst, then to junior partner, faster than anyone else in the firm's history. But something had shifted. Being a junior partner at someone else's firm wasn't enough anymore. I wanted to build something of my own. I started consulting on the side for small businesses that couldn't afford big firms. I worked days and nights and weekends. I didn't do it for the money. I did it because I was good at it and because these people listened to me, trusted me, thanked me. One of my first clients was Rosa Martinez, who owned a small chain of bakeries. She was drowning in debt. We spent 3 months restructuring her loans and renegotiating contracts. We saved her business. She hugged me and cried, called me an angel. I wasn't an angel. I just knew how to read a balance sheet. That's when I started noticing a pattern. Many of my clients were being squeezed by the same commercial real estate company, Riverside Property Group. They bought buildings, raised rents, forced businesses out, then flipped the properties. It was legal, it was predatory. I started digging, because that's what I do, and what I found would change everything. Riverside Property Group didn't look suspicious at first glance. That was the point. They had a clean website with stock photos of smiling families and tasteful buzzwords like community revitalization and smart growth. Their annual reports were polished. Their numbers were tidy, too tidy. I started pulling public records late at night from my kitchen table, laptop balanced between cold mugs of tea, lease agreements, LLC registrations, shell companies that all traced back to the same 3 directors, properties transferred between subsidiaries at odd intervals, inflated maintenance fees billed to tenants through third-party vendors that were, surprise, also owned by Riverside. It was death by 1,000 paper cuts. Small businesses bled out slowly, convinced it was their fault for not trying harder. It felt familiar. The deeper I went, the more my stomach twisted, because the pattern wasn't just financial. It was psychological. They targeted immigrant-owned businesses, first-time owners, people who didn't have the resources or confidence to push back. They framed every increase as standard, every penalty as policy, every complaint as misunderstanding. Gaslighting, but with spreadsheets. I built a model, then another. I stress-tested their numbers 6 different ways until the truth was undeniable. Riverside Property Group was systematically extracting value by skirting the edge of legality, just far enough inside the lines to avoid regulators, just far enough outside ethics to ruin lives. I could have reported them anonymously. I didn't, because the more I looked at it, the more personal it felt. This wasn't just a bad company. This was a philosophy, power through intimidation, control through confusion, punish resistance, reward compliance. I knew this playbook. I'd been raised by it. I quit my job 2 weeks later. Marcus tried to talk me out of it. "You're throwing away a guaranteed path to partner," he said, rubbing his temples. "You're brilliant, Sarah, but this is risky. Starting your own firm, taking on people like Riverside, they have money, lawyers, influence." "I know," I said, and for once I wasn't afraid. I launched Chen Advisory Group out of my apartment with a second-hand desk and a website I built myself. I took only clients who were being crushed by predatory contracts. I charged less than market rate and worked twice as hard. Word spread. Within 6 months, I had more work than I could handle. That's when Riverside noticed me. The letter arrived on thick cream paper with embossed lettering. Cease and desist. They accused me of defamation, interference, professional misconduct. They demanded I stop advising their tenants immediately or face legal action. I read it 3 times. My hands were steady. This was intimidation. Clean, polite, designed to scare me into silence. I laughed out loud in my empty apartment. Then I called a lawyer. Her name was Nadia Patel. She was sharp and relentless and had the kind of calm confidence that came from winning ugly fights against uglier opponents. "They're bluffing," she said after reviewing my documentation. "You're careful, everything you've done is legal, but they don't need to win to hurt you, they just need to drain you." "Then we don't let them," I said. Over the next year, Riverside escalated. They subpoenaed my records. They pressured my clients. They tried to bury me in paperwork and legal fees. I responded with facts. Nadia and I filed complaints with state regulators. We handed over neatly organized binders of evidence. We encouraged tenants to document everything. We created a shared database, rent hikes, maintenance delays, retaliatory fines. Patterns emerged. Regulators took notice. And then, because this is how these things always go, someone inside Riverside panicked. An envelope arrived at my office with no return address. Inside was a flash drive and a single note. "They're worse than you think." What was on that drive was explosive. Internal emails discussing strategies to force tenants out faster. Explicit instructions to ignore maintenance requests until businesses failed inspections. Conversations about targeting owners who don't know their rights and won't fight back. There was one name that kept coming up in the emails: Patricia Chen, my mother. She wasn't just tangentially involved. She was Riverside Property Group's Director of Community Relations, the public face. The woman who smoothed things over while the company bled people dry behind the scenes. She was the smiling reassurance while the knife went in. The irony would have been funny if it didn't feel like being punched in the chest. Everything snapped into focus. Her obsession with appearances, her contempt for small people, her belief that power entitled you to control others. This wasn't just how she treated me. This was who she was. I stared at my reflection in the dark computer screen and felt something settle in my bones. This wasn't a coincidence. This was a reckoning. I didn't confront her. Not yet. First, I made sure every document was backed up in 5 different places. I coordinated with Nadia. We prepared for the fallout. Then I did something I never thought I'd do. I went home. I walked into my parents' house on a Sunday afternoon like nothing had changed. Same flowers, same furniture, same suffocating perfection. My mother smiled when she saw me, that familiar brittle smile. "Well," she said, "look who finally decided to come back." I smiled right back. "I just wanted to talk," I said. About Riverside Property Group. For the first time in my life, my mother looked afraid. The fear on my mother's face vanished almost instantly. She recovered the way practiced liars do, by turning the moment into theater. "I don't know what you're talking about," Patricia said lightly. "You always were prone to dramatic assumptions." Same script, different stage. I stepped into the living room without waiting for an invitation. I sat on the edge of the armchair like a guest who knew she wouldn't be staying long. "I know about the shell companies," I said. "The inflated maintenance fees, the retaliatory inspections. I know you sign off on the tenant communications. I know you're the one who reassures them while legal squeezes them dry." She laughed, a brittle, incredulous sound. "You quit a perfectly good career to play activist, and now you're accusing your own mother of corporate malfeasance." "Sarah, this is embarrassing." I pulled a folder from my bag and placed it on the coffee table. Thick, heavy, real, her eyes flicked down despite herself. "Internal emails," I continued. "Policies. Strategy memos, including several from you, including the one where you wrote, 'If they can't afford compliance, they shouldn't be in business.'" Her smile hardened. "You stole proprietary information." "It was given to me," I said, "by someone who finally grew a conscience." She leaned back, crossing her legs, composure snapping back into place like armor. "You don't understand how the real world works," she said. "This is business. These people take risks. Sometimes risks don't pay off. It's not my job to coddle them. They're losing their livelihoods," I said. "Their life savings." "And that's unfortunate," Patricia replied smoothly. "But emotions have no place in economics. You should know that, given your background." There it was, the moral vacuum dressed up as pragmatism. "You taught me that," I said. "You taught me emotions were weaknesses. That people who struggled deserved it. That power meant control." She tilted her head, studied me. "And look how far it got you," she said. "You should be thanking me." Something in me went very still. "I didn't come here to argue," I said. "I came to tell you what's going to happen." Her eyebrows rose slightly. "Oh, I'm turning everything over to the regulators," I said. "State, federal, civil suits are coming. Riverside is going to bleed." She laughed again, softer this time. "You don't have the resources," she said. "They'll crush you." "Maybe," I said, "but they won't be able to bury the truth, not this time." Her eyes sharpened. "And what do you think happens to me?" "That depends," I said, "on how you respond." Silence stretched between us. Then she said it, the thing she always said when she wanted to end a conversation without conceding. "You're imagining things, Sarah." I stood. "No," I said. "I finally stopped imagining the version of you I wanted and started seeing the one that exists." I walked out without waiting for her reply. The lawsuits hit 3 weeks later. It was chaos. Media coverage, tenant interviews, regulators issuing subpoenas. Riverside's stock took a hit, investors panicked, executives resigned, and Patricia, she went on damage control. She told everyone I was unstable, that I'd always been jealous, that I had a history of emotional problems, that I was retaliating because she'd tried to help me. It worked on some people. My father left me a voicemail. "Your mother is under a lot of stress," he said. "You didn't need to take it this far." Jason sent a text. "Mom crying every day. You happy now?" I didn't respond. Because here's the thing about finally seeing the truth. Once you do, guilt stops working the way it used to. The regulator interviews were brutal. Long days, endless documentation. Riverside fought hard, but facts are stubborn. 6 months in, Riverside settled, quietly, expensively. They admitted no wrongdoing. They agreed to massive fines. They restructured leases. They set up a restitution fund for displaced tenants. Patricia was encouraged to retire. She didn't call me, not once. I heard about it from Jason. "She says you destroyed her life," he said. I closed my eyes. "She destroyed her own life," I replied. "I just stopped protecting her from the consequences." The night the settlement was finalized, I sat alone in my apartment and waited for the feeling I'd expected my whole life. Triumph, relief, vindication. What I felt instead was grief, not for her, for the version of myself that had spent decades trying to earn love from someone incapable of giving it. I cried for the 6-year-old with the drawing, for the teenager in the blue prom dress, for the woman who kept notebooks just to prove she wasn't crazy. And then, quietly, unexpectedly, I felt peace. Not forgiveness, freedom. After the settlement, people expected me to feel victorious. They said things like, "You must feel so proud, and you really took her down, and that must have been so satisfying." They said it with awe, like I'd slain a dragon instead of dismantled a system that should never have existed in the first place. I nodded. I smiled when appropriate. I learned which reactions made people comfortable. Inside, everything was quieter than it had ever been. The war was over, and for the first time in my life, there was no voice telling me what to do next. Chen Advisory Group exploded after the Riverside case. Media coverage brought credibility, credibility brought clients, and clients brought more work than I could reasonably manage. I hired 2 analysts, then 4. Moved out of my apartment and into a real office with glass walls and a conference room that smelled faintly of new carpet and possibility. I should have been thrilled. Instead, I felt untethered. Trauma does that. It wires you for constant vigilance. When the danger disappears, your nervous system doesn't know what to do with the silence. I kept waiting for something to go wrong. For retaliation, for the other shoe to drop. It never did. Patricia faded from public view. Her professional obituary framed her departure as a graceful retirement after decades of service. No mention of settlements or investigations. No accountability beyond whispered reputational damage and the quiet withdrawal of invitations. She got to disappear. That used to infuriate me. Over time, it stopped mattering. Jason tried to reconnect a few months later. He suggested coffee, neutral territory, like we were diplomats instead of siblings. "You don't understand what it's been like," he said, stirring his drink aggressively. "Mom's not the same. She barely leaves the house. Dad's exhausted. You blew everything up." I listened. I really did. And then I said, "You're right. I don't understand what it's been like for you, but you never tried to understand what it was like for me." He opened his mouth, closed it. "That doesn't mean I hate you," I continued. "But I'm done taking responsibility for pain I didn't cause." We finished our coffee politely. We haven't seen each other since. That was the hardest lesson of all. Sometimes growth costs you people who only knew how to love you when you were small. Work became steadier, more strategic. I took fewer clients, charged appropriately, slept occasionally. I started therapy at Nadia's not-so-subtle insistence. "You dismantled a corporation," she said. "You can survive a few emotions." Therapy was brutal, not because of what I uncovered, but because of what I had to give up. Hope, not hope in general, hope specifically for my mother to change. Hope that one day she'd call and say she was proud of me without a qualifier. Hope that there was a version of her who could love me cleanly. Letting go of that hope felt like a second betrayal. but it also felt like setting down a weight I'd been carrying since childhood. I learned new language, boundary, gaslighting, conditional regard, complex trauma. I learned that hyperindependence is not the same thing as strength. That competence can be armor. That control can feel like safety when chaos was your first home. And slowly, awkwardly, I learned how to rest. I dated disastrously at first. Turns out if you grow up being told love is something you earn by being perfect, you end up attracted to people who make you feel like you're always one mistake away from abandonment. Therapy helped with that too. I bought a house a year later, nothing extravagant, just a small place with big windows and a backyard I didn't know what to do with. I planted herbs and forgot to water them and laughed when some of them survived anyway. No one criticized the mess. That might have been my favorite part. On my 32nd birthday, I received a card in the mail, no return address. The handwriting was unmistakable. "I hope you're happy," it read. "You always wanted to win. I hope it was worth it." I stared at it for a long time. Then I threw it away. Because here's the truth she never understood. I didn't want to win. I wanted to be free, and I was. Freedom didn't arrive all at once. It came in fragments. In moments so small I almost missed them. Like the first time I made a decision without mentally rehearsing how I'd justify it to someone who wasn't there anymore. Or the first morning I woke up without that familiar knot of dread, the one that used to sit in my chest like a warning light. I didn't notice those changes right away. Healing is quiet. It doesn't announce itself. It just rearranges your life while you're busy looking elsewhere. The firm stabilized. Chen Advisory Group became something solid instead of something reactive. I stopped operating in crisis mode and started thinking long-term. Sustainability, mentorship, systems that didn't depend on me burning myself out to keep them running. I hired people who reminded me of myself before I learned how to shrink. Smart, careful, apologetic for no reason. I tried to be the kind of leader I'd needed. Clear expectations. Direct feedback without cruelty. Praise without conditions. It mattered more to me than revenue ever had. One afternoon, my junior analyst Mia knocked on my office door, eyes wide. "I think I found something," she said, breathless, "but I'm not sure if I'm overreacting." Old Sarah would have dismissed herself before finishing the sentence. "Show me," I said. She was right. And I told her so. She blinked like she wasn't used to hearing that without a caveat. That was when it hit me. Cycles don't just break. They're replaced, not with perfection, with intention. Outside of work, my life was quieter than I'd imagined success would be. No grand celebrations, no cinematic closure, just steadiness. I started cooking for myself instead of treating food like fuel. I learned I liked gardening despite killing half of what I planted. I developed an embarrassing fondness for crossword puzzles and early bedtimes. I also learned how much of my identity had been built in opposition to my mother. For years, my decisions had been fueled by not her values, not her cruelty, not her emptiness. But when you remove the thing you're reacting to, you're left with a question that's much harder to answer. Who are you when no one is watching? That question haunted me. I brought it to therapy like a bruise. If I'm not proving something, I told my therapist, I don't know who I am. She nodded. Then we get to find out. That process was disorienting. I'd spent decades chasing excellence because it was the only currency I'd been taught mattered. Letting myself be average at things, hobbies, relationships, rest, felt almost dangerous. But danger turned out to be boredom, and boredom turned out to be peace. I dated again, more carefully this time. I learned to recognize the red flags I used to confuse with chemistry. The dismissiveness, the subtle contempt disguised as humor, the way some people test your boundaries just to see if you'll defend them. I stopped defending. I left. Then I met Daniel. It wasn't fireworks. It was clarity. He asked questions and actually waited for the answers. He didn't flinch when I said no. He didn't need me to perform competence to be worthy of care. The first time I cried in front of him, I apologized out of reflex. He looked confused. "Why?" I didn't have an answer. That should have scared me. Instead, it felt like exhaling. We took things slowly. I didn't tell him about my mother right away. I wanted to make sure I wasn't recreating the same dynamic with a different face. When I finally did tell him, he listened. Didn't interrupt, didn't minimize, didn't try to fix it. "I'm really glad you got out," he said. That was it. No advice, no reframing, no silver lining, just acknowledgement. I didn't realize how rare that was until I had it. Around that time, my father called. It had been over a year since we'd spoken. "I should have protected you," he said, without preamble. His voice sounded smaller than I remembered. "I didn't, and I'm sorry." I sat with that for a long moment. "I believe you," I said finally. "We didn't rebuild anything. Not really. We started something new. Occasional calls, careful conversations, boundaries that didn't need defending because they were respected. He never asked me to reconcile with my mother. That mattered. I learned later that Patricia had been diagnosed with early-onset dementia. The news landed with a strange neutrality. I felt sadness. I felt distance. I felt relief, and then guilt for the relief. Therapy helped with that too. Compassion doesn't require proximity. Forgiveness doesn't require access. And closure doesn't always look like reconciliation. Sometimes it looks like letting the story end where it is. The last time I thought about her intensely was on an ordinary Tuesday, standing in my kitchen, sunlight pouring through the windows. I realized I couldn't remember the sound of her voice without effort. That used to terrify me. Now, it felt like a gift. There's a strange myth about healing that no one tells you is a lie. That once you've done the work, once you've named the damage, confronted the source, built a life that feels safe, you arrive somewhere finished. Resolved. Clean, you don't. What you arrive at is choice. And choice is heavier than pain in its own way. By my mid-30s, my life looked stable from the outside. The firm was thriving without devouring me. I was in a relationship that felt reciprocal instead of extractive. I slept through the night more often than not. I had everything I'd fought for. And yet, there was a quiet question humming beneath it all. What do I do with the rest of my life now that I'm not surviving it? The question surfaced most sharply the day Nadia told me she was leaving. "I'm moving to D.C., she said, casual like she wasn't detonating a cornerstone of my adult life. Public interest work. Federal oversight." I hugged her, proud and sad in equal measure. "You're ready," she said. "You've been ready for a while." Ready for what? I didn't know. The firm didn't need me the way it used to. My team was strong. Systems were in place. I'd succeeded in building something that could exist without my constant presence, which, ironically, left me feeling unnecessary. For someone who'd grown up equating worth with utility, that was destabilizing. I took a sabbatical, 6 months. No clients, no crises, no adrenaline, just time. Daniel was supportive, though cautious. "You don't have to disappear to figure things out," he said gently. "I know," I replied. "But I think I need to be bored enough to hear myself think." The first month was agony. I cleaned obsessively, rearranged furniture, picked fights with myself, reached for productivity like a phantom limb. Then, slowly, my nervous system recalibrated. I read fiction for pleasure, took long walks without tracking steps, sat in cafes and watched people without wondering what they needed from me. And somewhere in that quiet, an old memory resurfaced. The drawing, not the criticism, the feeling before it, the pride. The joy of making something just because it existed. I started writing again, not for publication, not for anyone else, just for me. At first, it was disjointed. Scenes, fragments. Anger I didn't realize I still carried. Grief that hadn't found language yet. Then it cohered. I wrote about control, about power disguised as care, about the violence of being told your reality is negotiable. I wrote about the systems that reward people like my mother and crush people like Rosa. I wrote without permission. When I finally let Daniel read some of it, he was quiet for a long time. "This matters," he said. "Not because it's dramatic, because it's true." I brushed it off. I wasn't trying to be a writer. I'd had enough of ambition, but the idea lodged itself somewhere deep. A few weeks later, I got an email from Mia. She'd taken a job at a nonprofit focused on small business advocacy. She wanted my advice. We met for lunch. "I learned more watching you than I ever did in school," she said. "Not just finance, how to lead without fear." That hit harder than any award ever had. Later that night, lying awake, it clicked. This was the through line. Not winning, not proving, not dismantling for the sake of destruction. Translation. Helping people understand systems that were designed to confuse them. Giving language to experiences they'd been told were personal failures instead of structural abuse. I didn't want to run from power anymore. I wanted to explain it. The sabbatical ended with clarity instead of fireworks. I returned to the firm not as its center, but as its steward. I shifted my role, more mentoring, less frontline warfare. I set up an internal training program focused on ethical consulting and client advocacy, and I started working on the manuscript seriously. The timing was strange because around then my father's health declined. We spoke more often, carefully, kindly. One afternoon during a visit, he mentioned my mother without prompting. "She doesn't remember much anymore," he said. "Sometimes she asks about you, other times she doesn't recognize me." I felt the old reflex rise, guilt, obligation, the instinct to return. I let it pass. "I hope she's comfortable," I said, and I meant it. He nodded. "You don't owe her anything." Hearing that from him felt like a door closing softly instead of slamming shut. When she died, a year later, I didn't rush home. I attended the funeral quietly, sat in the back, left early. There was no reconciliation, no final revelation, just an ending. And for the first time, that was enough. Grief showed up in unexpected ways, not as longing, but as a dull ache for what never was. I let it exist without trying to solve it. Because that's what maturity had taught me. Some wounds don't close. They just stop bleeding. The manuscript was nearly done when I realized something that made me laugh out loud. I wasn't writing to be understood by my mother. I was writing to make sure people like me never had to doubt their reality again. That was the work now, not survival. Legacy. The book came out on a quiet Tuesday. No midnight release. No viral moment. No line around the block. Just a brown box on my porch with my name printed neatly on the label. I carried it inside and set it on the kitchen table. Made coffee. Let it sit there unopened for a while, like it might disappear if I acknowledged it too directly. When I finally cut the tape and lifted the lid, I felt something close to disbelief. There it was. My name on the cover, not as a daughter, not as an analyst, not as a cautionary tale, just my name. I didn't cry. That surprised me. What I felt instead was recognition, like meeting a version of myself I'd been walking toward my entire life without realizing it. The reviews trickled in slowly. Not raves, not takedowns. People wrote to say things like I thought this was just me and I didn't have words for this until now, and I stopped blaming myself halfway through. Those were the ones I kept. The firm continued on, steady and unglamorous in the best way. I stepped back further, trusted the systems I'd built, watched other people step into leadership without having to claw for it. Mia sent me a photo one afternoon. She was standing in front of a classroom, whiteboard behind her, explaining predatory lending practices to a group of small business owners. "You started this," she wrote. I hadn't. But I'd made space for it. Daniel and I never married. We talked about it, thought about it, ultimately decided we didn't need the symbolism to validate what we'd built. We shared a house, a life, a language that didn't require translation. Some nights we sat on the back porch in silence, and that silence felt like trust instead of absence. On the anniversary of my mother's death, I went for a long walk alone. I didn't visit her grave. I didn't need to. The person she'd shaped me to be, the one who doubted herself, apologized for breathing, mistook control for love, was already gone. That was the only ending that mattered. People still ask me if I've forgiven her. I tell them the truth. Forgiveness was never the point. Understanding was. Understanding that harm doesn't always look like violence. That control can wear the mask of concern. That love, when conditional, is just another transaction. Understanding gave me my life back. If I could speak to the girl I used to be, the one holding the drawing, the notebooks, the ache, I wouldn't tell her it all works out. I'd tell her something better. You're not wrong. You never were. And one day, you'll stop asking for permission to exist. That day is quieter than you think. It arrives without applause. It feels like standing in your own kitchen, sunlight on the floor, nothing urgent to prove. Just space, just breath, just you.